Hi there, I'm Gary. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've been here before. Now, today is the first session report from the Content Creators Day held by Airfix at the beginning of the week. Very nicely, they invited me along too. Today's video is all about their presentations on how they choose which kits are going into the range each year. Then we'll look at how they do the research on the aircraft that they're going to make, the new tools they're going to make, the 3D scanning they do to make sure they're really accurate, and of course how they turn all of that into a product in product design. Now that's a pretty long old video today, so do remember that all of these bits come as chapters so you can hop backwards and forwards as your heart's content. If you like the show, and I hope you do, please do remember to say so by giving it a like below, by clicking the thumbs up button. And of course, if you would like to give a bit more concrete support, you can do that through Super Thanks or through any of the partner programs that are listed in the information box below. Well, let's make a start then. How do they choose what kits they're going to put into the range? And to tell us all about that is the researcher Luke Slaney-Hewitt.
So product selection, as you can tell, is crucial to the business. Getting it right, makes us a profit or a loss, but it also means we keep the customers happy or unhappy. If we're delivering stuff you don't want and it doesn't get bought, then we haven't got a job anymore. We've sort of got three categories we have to look at each year. We want new capex, so that's stuff we're going to spend the money on to develop new, essentially. Stuff that we're going to refresh and re-release, and vintage classics as well. So stuff that was made in the 60s and we bring back sort of fan favourites, if you will. So when we look at new capex, you've also got year 2 and year 3 capex, which starts to sound a bit complex, but essentially when we design a model, we're looking to see if we can do extra releases on top of that. You'll do the Canadair Sabre, and then you'll look at what we're going to do in the 2nd or 3rd year by adding a few extra parts, change the box up, and in this case it was the F86 F40. Refresh and re-release and vintage classics is a bit different because you can't just keep adding to your catalogue year after year as much as we'd like to, because you won't sell them all, and you've got to rotate. You've got to sort of keep that range fresh. So you've got to kill products every year. You've got to get rid of stuff, which is always really hard. Probably one of the hardest choices we face is what do we get rid of. Not only because some of them are our favourite models, but also because sometimes the numbers are so close, it's a case of a bit of a gut feeling. There's a lot of science that goes into it as well. Don't worry. So that's sort of what we're looking to do. We're trying to fill those categories every year and kill off a few products every year. Right, we've decided, our new CapEx project, what are we doing? We've got a few things to look at. So are there any gaps in the market? Is there anything that's really obvious, or maybe not so obvious, that no model company's done in ages? The Walrus is an example of that you see, and there's plenty of others. If it's not been done, great, let's jump in. But the model market's so evolved now, everything seems to have been done in some capacity. There are exceptions, thankfully. Release schedule. So as I was sort of saying on year 2, year 3 capex, you want to be able to release a model and then the year after add parts, and ideally every year after that keep adding parts, but there's limitations to what you can do in plastic. So we're looking at that. Can we get more than one release out of a model? The Seeking at 70 seconds is a really good example of that. There's loads of releases you can do. Growing ranges. So you don't just want to release a product by itself, with nothing around it, because people like to build collections. They like to build similar subjects. So the Buccaneer is a good example of Fleet Air Run. We're very aware people like to build that, so you sort of try and cater that. And Cold War jets, the Vampires are a good example of that. There are rule breakers. There are things that don't fit the mould, things that we shouldn't do, or on paper it looks like we shouldn't do. The Swift is maybe an example of that. The release schedule after that, there isn't one. It's a single release. But again, there's a gap in the market, maybe. So rule breakers in some terms, in some ways, but also if there's a gap, it's great. And of course, previous sales. We have to look at what has sold before, what's going to sell again, what's going to make us the money. And yes, there's a Spitfire up there because they make us lots of money, they sell lots, people enjoy Spitfires. And also sort of the reputation of an aircraft. So I think part of the reason we sell more Spitfires than Hurricanes is because it's the more glamorous aircraft. You know, everyone seems to be a fan of a Spitfire. And it goes for all the other ranges as well. There'll be sort of an icon of that range, and then ones that are lesser known. So we look at that. I'll go through a few examples. The first one being Hawker Hunter. Our boss has bought a one-to-one Hawker Hunter, but when we were designing the kit, we had to look, well, when we went to go look to see what we could do, the part of this is there's a bit of a gap in the market. So at 48, Hunter hadn't really been done in a while. So, you know, we use the modeller's favourite tool, ScaleMates, quite a bit to see what's out there, as well as our knowledge as modelers. And, you know, you can look at the Academy Italeri one. Even though there might be more recent releases, you go, oh, they released that last year. Yes, but the tooling's from 97 or the tooling's from 78 and it's been reboxed 20 times. So we have to look at stuff like that. Are there gaps? Is it, you know, we're Airfix, we're a British company, and when we pick subjects, quite often that's our niche, British subjects, something that connects everyone to, you know, the motherland, shall we say. Has to be iconic. As I was saying about Spitfire, everyone knows a Hunter, maybe after 2015 for different reasons, but it was an iconic jet of its time, and it was an airshow regular. But also, the research is readily available, which makes my job easier. But that's not a reason to pick it, it's just a nice side effect. I put a little con down there, which is lack of enthusiasm, because something we noticed with the Hunter was maybe there's a gap because no one wants a Hunter. We haven't found that, thankfully. But you do have to question it. Why has no one built that? Why has no one done that model? And it keeps us awake at night. Another example is 70-second seeking. As I was saying on the first one, you know, release schedule, making sure you've got enough legs in the model to go the distance and sell lots of different variants. You know, and adding to a range as well. So something that some of you might notice is rotaries missing from the range a bit, and it's one of my passions is to, you know, I like helicopters, so it's a nice subject. And there's always the possibility to expand. So you might design for 2 or 3 models, but then in 10 years' time, you might turn around and go, right, what have we got in the tool bank that we can change slightly and bring back out to make it significantly different, something that's a bit odd. You know, we don't modify the tooling, but we might add parts. But again, cons, you can't do the Sikorsky variants of the Seeking if you're doing the Western, so you immediately tie your hands, you know, one hand behind your back with that sort of thing. One example of getting the legs out of the tooling, releasing lots of from the original tool, is the P51, and trying to add parts each time and do a new model. So luckily this year we've sort of come full circle. So we released the original one way back, and you'll see it sort of every year since then we've brought out a new version of that. And down the bottom is our newest one, the Millie G boxing, which is sort of back to the original part count as the original release. But you'll see here this spreadsheet that looks very dull, not very interesting, actually breaks down what parts are going to be in each boxing. And this is something Matt and all the other designers will put together to work out, right, where are these parts sitting in the tool? Can we sort of add them onto an extra box and stuff like that? So you'll see, you know, F51D, P51D late. There'll be different versions that we account for. So it's a lot of planning before we've even made the model. And I think I might be shot if I don't mention starter sets. Obviously quite a new range. This is sort of, again, a bit different to how we'd normally select new CapEx, because you're looking at very much what's famous, you know, what do kids know. So Spitfire and Red Arrow's Hawk are obvious choices there, and the Firefly and the Tiger. But also you've got the civilian stuff, which is being pushed for more, because more and more parents don't want to buy war machines, let's say. They want to buy something that's, you know, not to do with war. And we've got the supercar range for that. And Dale, you wanted to say a few bits?
But obviously there's a lot of focus on starter sets. There has been over the last couple of years with the new Spitfire. the new Hawk, the tanks are obviously new in 72nd. And then this year with the supercars, you're going to see that next year as well. Okay, so we have got a 5-year plan with starter sets, and then after that, we don't know where we're going to go with it, but we will have a significant range of new tooled for beginners from the outset under starter set boxings. All right, so basically give you a heads up. You know, next year's product announcement might not be as glamorous as the enthusiast would hope for. You know, there might not be a 148 scale Buccaneer. There might not be a 124 scale Spitfire, because a lot of stuff has been focused on bringing out new starter set tooling for obvious reasons. And once we've gone through that program, then we're back on track with you know, the enthusiast models. All right.
So it looks like there's more emphasis on starter kits in the range next year. I'm not disappointed in that. If they're new tools and they are as good as the starter sets have been recently, then bring them on. I say I enjoyed making them. I would imagine anyone new to the hobby is going to really enjoy making them, because you can get a really quite good looking kit with not that much effort, and if you put just a little bit more effort into it, you can make something that looks really quite stunning that you put up on your shelf and say, yeah, I made that. Wonderful. Brings more people into the hobby. I'm not going to argue with that at all. I think they may have to do a bit of work on the marketing, on the branding I should say, to make more of a difference between the starter sets on one side, which are all the new tools and amazing kits, and the gift sets, which are existing kits, which then have paint and glue and brushes added to them. Because if you buy a starter set and you're new to Airfix, the experience, generally speaking, is going to be fantastic. If you buy a gift set, if you haven't made a model before, some of them are not all that great to build. So, and we all know which ones they are, we've all built them. So, lots of new starter sets, I'm really up for that, that'll be fantastic. Now, once you've decided what you're going to make next year or the year after, how do you turn that into something that can go on the shelf? Well, the next step is research and data collection. So let's get back to Luke.
So the research process, I've used the Hunter and I've split between the Spitfire as well. So as I say, data collection, you want to be looking at manuals. Stuff that's really helpful is sort of repair and reconditioning manuals. Drawings aren't always available. We, as the British, are terrible compared to our American cousins at keeping records from production drawings. You could go to the Smithsonian and pretty much order a whole set of drawings for the B25, as we did, I believe, and the B17. If you want to do that for the Vulcan, no hope. You will find bits, and you'll find here, there, everywhere. You find stories of these companies getting sort of bought out and merged into one, and drawings being thrown into furnaces, and people trying to save it in the backs of their cars. So you end up with a snapshot of the time, but nowhere near the full amount. So manuals are normally sort of a godsend for that. And I know Buccaneer, it was really helpful. So as I sort of mentioned, you've got all the paper stuff, but you've also got visiting the aircraft. It's invaluable. I started the job thinking, right, get all the drawings, get all the documents together, and the designers can go. Visiting the aircraft is crucial. Otherwise you'll miss really small things, and the designer will get a feel for the aircraft, and at this point they're probably involved. They've done the skeleton model or getting over the skeleton model. They come to detailing. They really need to see the real thing to get an appreciation for it and do a photo walk around. So we do take loads of photos, as you can see here. This is from when we were researching the Hunter. I believe that top left photo is at Tangmere. So we try and keep it local if we can, just to save the miles, and take as many photos as we can. That little stick down there gives us a reference for how big it is. It's very hard to. It's like putting a penny next to something when you're selling it on eBay, let's say, to give a perspective of size. When you come to look at it, maybe a month, 2 months, 6 months later. Talk about building this library of stuff. You want original drawings where you can. Spitfire is one example where we've got quite a lot of drawings. We've made quite a few Spitfires over the years, so when we came to do the 9, we had quite a lot of information. You want to look at restored aircraft. You use that where you can. but you have to be very, very, very careful. You know, there's stuff that's been added in, not just radios, modifications over its lifetime that you might not be aware of, and the person showing you round, the people that own these aircraft, might not be aware of. So you really have to cross-reference with period photos, and you do a lot of looking between. It's like the biggest game, spot the difference, and that's most of my job, is spot the difference. And then you also want to talk to experts. Invaluable. They are amazing. The stuff people know that you, by searching Google or other things, you'd never find out. You need to get in contact with people that know their stuff, essentially, and they can hold your hand. If you find a good expert, it makes my job very easy, and it makes the designer's job a bit easier as well, because they can point out things you'd never have thought of. And then 3D scanning as well. That's a useful tool, but again, it goes back to restored aircraft. You have to be very careful with it, and making sure you don't copy anything that shouldn't be there. And here are just a few more drawings from the Spitfire. So you can see we've got loads, original Supermarine drawings stored on the cloud, the server where we are. I mentioned this critique that we did, and this is actually from when Matt was critiquing the Mark 9 Spitfire. We go through and we look at everything. So you'll see down here on the right, you've got the air bottles. Chris was reading one of these books and saw an image of the air bottles and created them as he thought they were. It's not until we came to look at it we realised the one in the restored aircraft that the photo was of was the NATO air bottles, not the originals. And here's one of the drawings that we had and a photo that we had as well. So looking at small things like that, again, really easy to slip through the net. This is why you need fresh eyes on everything. Small things like mirroring rivets, rather than handing them, it takes a lot of attention to detail to notice that on something that's as big as a Spitfire when you're looking at individual rivets. But our consumers would know. And various aerials, and you go through step by step, looking all the way down the aircraft, trying to find anything that's wrong. And then going on to scheme selection, I'll breeze through this because I've spoken about it at length, but you want to pick a variety of schemes with any new model. So you've got the A scheme here and there, in fact, from the Mark 9C. You want to be picking something that's got wide appeal. So I believe in terms of national appeal, it's an RAF aircraft. It's part of the Persian Gulf, but flown by a Greek Rhodesian ace. So you've got a lot of stuff going on there. You've got a Canadian pilot, a Canadian squadron. You've got different nose artwork on the Spitfires across the 4 schemes. You've got the French scheme, you've got the American scheme. So you're trying to cater for as wide an audience as possible. So this is the A scheme, as seen flying over the beaches at D-Day before Johnny Plagis took over. A famous aircraft nonetheless. EN398, which might be famous for different reasons, but this is Ian Kelty's aircraft before Johnny Johnson took it over. A bit of a fan favourite aircraft for the Mark 9, which originally wasn't included in the schemes, but we thought we could go a bit different with the EN398, but we've included it due to pressure.
Demand.
Demand, yes. And then this is the American scheme that we had, which is really nice. Garth Jarrett's, he was the sort of squadron leader of the 309. And then my personal favourite is the French clipped wing one, which is just what we like to call the weird and wacky scheme that we try and put in. Something that's a bit different, a bit off the wall, shall we say. And talking of 3D scanning earlier, it's worth mentioning before we go for break, I believe, we did scan the Spitfire after we designed it all. We were so confident in the drawings that we were confident the shape would be right. And it's not until I scanned the T9 at Biggin Hill for Corgi, for their model, we overlaid it, which was a nerve-wracking moment when I said, Chris, you've designed the Spitfire, we've got a scan of it, do you want to check if it's right? And it was sort of, no, we don't want to check. But I would say amazing. Not surprisingly at all, it was perfect, fit over. Apart from the front cockpit on the T9 is slightly forward by 13 inches, and I tried to convince Chris that he got the whole position of the cockpit wrong, but he didn't buy it. But it just shows, it's not the be-all and end-all 3D scanning, but it can help.
Well, yes, Luke, you're right. 3D scanning isn't the be-all and end-all of modern model making. However, it is still a very much vital part of the process to designing and producing a new kit. So let's have a look and see how Airfix do it.
So it's a bit of a mystery to everyone. How does 3D scanning work, apart from getting a lovely sort of template at the end? So there are 4 steps to it. Scouting, so finding the appropriate aircraft to scan. So at this point we know what we're doing, we know what the model is, and we've got to find somewhere to actually scan that. You've got the physical process of scanning it, and that's the easy bit, that's the really easy bit. The scouting and then the next 2 steps are the hard bits essentially. The third step is import and point cloud manipulation, which all sounds very complicated, but essentially you get a lot of data from this. So what it does is sends out a laser pulse and measures how long that takes to come back. A bit like your DIY rangefinder at home, your tape measure, but it does it 3 million times a second. So it's huge, a huge amount of data. It does that for 51 seconds, and then it takes 360 images. So you can imagine the size of the files that I'm getting. If you think your size of the files from today are big, no, get ready for 3D scanning files. It ends up with a thing called a point cloud. So each time it hits something and comes back, that's a point. And 3 million times a second times 51, someone can do the maths, it's a lot. And I do that 30 times around an aircraft. So you end up with a lot of these points, but it's not smart enough to know, I want that Spitfire, I want that Buccaneer. It will get everything. Everything that's around it will get. So I have to crop out what's around it, essentially. And then do something called meshing. So point cloud is pointless, pardon the pun, for the guys like Matt to actually use. You need to create it into a mesh, sort of a lot of little triangles that are all stitched together to work as a template. Scouting. So for the Buccaneer, I've used as an example here, there are lots of locations you can go to. We went over to Ulster, the Ulster Aviation Society, and scanned there. XV361, middle image here, with the wings folded up. And we scanned that, not for the 48th, but for the 72nd. Obviously it's the same template, it's the same aircraft, so you don't have to scan it again just to scale up. But you'll look at all sorts of things when you're going scanning. How accessible is the aircraft is one of the big ones. You know, can I get there? Not only can I drive there, but is there stuff around the aircraft? Is it UK based? Preferable if it is. Again, trying to save those miles. Do we have a good relationship with the museum? There are some museums that don't like us and there are some that do. And we like to go to the ones that do because they're a lot nicer. Is it outside or inside? The worst thing we can do, so we rent this scanner, is hire it, spend all the money, drive up there, and then it pours it down with rain because it will not work. So preferably you're inside. We don't just visit one aircraft either, not just for scanning but also just researching them. So top ones up there are Teabaggers, the Buccaneer Aviation Group, with a funny name, the Cotswolds, and down the bottom is actually our local museum, RF Anson History Museum, and that's one of the most complete cockpits you'll ever find for a Buccaneer. And it actually saved our bacon at the last minute regards to the rear navigator's cockpit, and there's a screen there that we've never seen because it's so rare that they're actually preserved aircraft. So saved our bacon. Here's another image of what I see on the iPad essentially as I'm going around. Those red dots and the links are where I've scanned. So it automatically knows where it is through lots of camera trickery, picks up fixed points and knows. You can move it and the dot will move. It's all very clever. So that's the sort of stuff that I'm seeing. And then, as I say, all pointless for that so far. What I need to do is something called meshing. So as I say, this is a rough and ready file, just something to demonstrate it. And you'll see it's rough and ready because we've got a big old triangle at the air intake, and don't need to be an aircraft spotter to know that's not on the Buccaneer. That's just where an extra point was, and it's trying to mesh it all together. Lots of little triangles, as you may be able to see, that big one there, but also all around it. The top one's been smoothed, which essentially gets rid of this triangle pattern, which is on the bottom there. You can sort of see the difference, and I'm trying to do that and make Matt's life as easy as possible and the other designers.
Thank you, Luke. So we have now got our drawings, we've got some scans, we've got some photographs, and we've got some archive as well to draw upon. So how do we get all these bits together, crack them together, and produce a new kit for Airfix? Well, the person to ask all about that is Matt Whiting, who is the design manager, and he'll talk us through the process by looking at the new Avro Anson. We'll be starting with some amazing box art.
Thanks for coming along. This is going to be the new box art for the Anson. I think you're some of the first guys to see it, so it's quite a famous event where a 500 squadron aircraft successfully fought away several Messerschmitt 109s, claimed a couple of kills. That's going to be the A scheme on our kit. So when we get into the sort of nitty gritty of the actual design process, first thing I did, get some sort of internal sort of foundation structure laid out. So this is looking at the original manufacturer's drawings and then reinterpreting them from 2D into 3D. There's 4 designers in the team, we've all got different ways of working, but I really love subjects like this where you can really get into the sort of engineering of the real aircraft, and sort of I absolutely love looking at all the sort of 70, 80-year-old engineering drawings. I find it sort of absolutely fascinating. So you can sort of see how this internal fuselage structure sort of sits inside the sort of wood and canvas fairings, and that's what actually carries all the loads that go through the aircraft. On top of that, I can then lay the scan data. So because I've got all that internal structure, I can make sure that the scan is scaled correctly. Also, some aircraft in museums, they're not quite the shape they're meant to be. Certainly the first aircraft we went down the 3D scanning route in 2013 was a Heinkel 111, which is in a museum in Norway. That aircraft was salvaged from the top of the mountain, essentially. And it, for all intents and purposes, in the museum, looks fantastic. I've done a lovely job of restoring it. When you get the scan into a CAD package and start plotting out what the true geometry of the wings and fuselage should be, you can see that where it's crashed, the whole airframe is just completely distorted, and it's really very asymmetrical. So it sort of gives us an opportunity to correct all of that and make sure that we're looking at something that's the right shape. So the scan data that Luke produces, that comes in as millions of tiny little triangles, which isn't a format we can use to sort of drive CNC tooling. It's great if you want to make a film or an animation, but not good for a sort of engineering use. So we have to start reverse engineering those triangular faceted surfaces into nice smooth parametric surfaces which can be used to make tools. So here we are, we're sort of starting to lay out the blue curves. So we're basically using the 3D scanners to trace over, and then we can lay those. That makes almost like a wireframe, which we can then lay on the nice smooth surfaces over the top. We have to do that twice because you've got the outside of the part which you can see. Obviously, moulded parts have to have a thickness, so you have to make that inside surface as well, so that you can make the other side of the mould. The way our CAD works is we have a top level, what we call a skeleton, and that contains all the geometry we'll need, and then that geometry can be filtered down into individual parts. And the idea is we can make a change at the top level, and without changing the parts, they can be regenerated, and they'll all regenerate together, so that you don't end up with sort of misalignment between parts. Or if you change the shape of one part, then the part next to it will update as well. That's the idea. Doesn't always work quite that smoothly. So all these surfaces that have been collected together can then be merged and combined into basically a sort of shell. If you imagine a hollow eggshell that forms both sides of the parts, and that is then what we call solidified, which converts the surfaces into basically a slightly different format within the CAD software, so you can start putting all the panel lines, rivet detail, things like that on. There's also quite a lot of engineering involved. Also, the parts got to fit together. They've also got to be able to be injection moulded. So we've got various tools so we can sort of analyse the parts, make sure that there's no undercuts, make sure that the part isn't too thick or too thin. Obviously the plastic will shrink or it won't fill the mould up properly. So we have to do this for every part, and obviously some of the bigger kits you can have up to 600 parts, so it can take quite a long time. Once we've got all the external parts laid out, we can really start fleshing out the details. So one of the lovely things about the Anson is this brilliant cabin, and at 48 scale you've got enough space to really put a lot into it, and you've got some nice flat glazing so you can see into it really clearly. One of the things I really love about the Anson as a subject is the sort of relationship that the crews had with it. Obviously you've got the training for the navigators, training for radio operators, training for bomb aimers, and they're all the guys that went on to fly missions in Lancasters, Halifaxes, aircraft like that. So having the sort of the individual crew stations where it's so clear what each person was doing, I thought that was a lovely aspect of this model. So we're adding parts to show the details we think are going to be most important. So we've got the sort of little angle poised lamp there, which you think, oh, that's such a small detail, but it's right next to the window, so it's one of the first things you see. So that's sort of warranted being its own part, and from there the parts breakdown sort of grows by itself. We don't set out to say, oh, the kit's got to have exactly 250 parts. It grows by itself when you sort of get into looking at how the details work together. Obviously we've got quite a lot of parts of the engines as well, because they're in this sort of quite big cowlings, so you can see quite a lot of them. And then you've got external details. The Anson was quite unique because it's got quite a lot of different types of surface texture. You've got I think there's magnesium sheeting around the nose, you've got the canvas on the fuselage, and then there's plywood on the wing. So figuring out how to represent all of those different surface textures was quite a challenge. We've gone for, on the wings where you've got the plywood, we've gone for a very similar effect to what we've done on the Hellcat and Typhoon, and to an extent the Spitfire. So it's just like as subtle as we can, just like a sort of very subtle stressed skin effects over the wings, sort of contrast with the other textures on the model. Once we've got it to a stage where we've got a whole set of parts, we then go to rapid prototyping. So in the room just on the other side of that wall, we've got a really nice SLA printer set up with all the curing station, parts washer. We can piece by piece print all the individual parts of the kit, put them together, make sure they work okay, and then if we're feeling that the parts aren't assembling right, or they're too tricky, or sometimes you can end up in a situation in CAD where it's like a sort of chicken and egg, where you can't assemble something nicely, so we can like go back, modify CAD files, print it out again, and make sure it's all up to scratch before we go into the tooling process. So the next stage is actually making the moulds. All our moulds at the moment are made in China. We work really closely with the mould makers, so we do have quite a big say in how the moulds work. We send them a spec of what we need, so we know how much the product is going to retail for, so we know what box size it's going to be in. So we give them a spec to do the initial sort of tool drawings, and how we do the breakdown of how the parts are laid out on the sprues. So we've got an idea of what parts we want to hold back for future releases, so we know that they need to be on a separate frame, things like that. We do as much as we can. Obviously no one likes filling ejector pin marks and things like that, so we do try as much as we can to eliminate ejector pin marks in awkward positions. Sometimes we're not happy with where they are, but they have to be there because otherwise the mould won't work properly. So there's always a bit of a compromise, but we do our best. And then we're sort of looking at things like feed gate position, how the cooling system works in the tool, how the runners are laid out, so it's not too hard to get the parts off the frames. So this is an example of the moulds in the Anson. This is when they were nearly finished and they were just about to start assembling the moulds properly. So you can see details like some of those black dots there. They're actually the holes that drilled for the ejector pins. and then you can see the actual tool, the mould inserts assembled into the bolster. So that is the whole part that will be mounted up in the injection moulding machine just before they do the tool trials. And then there's the clear tool just before it's polished. With clear tools, we often get test shots that aren't polished because the polishing takes such a long time. They don't want to be making changes and risk damaging that polished surface. Once the mould's made, we get to build the first test shots, which is quite. So I have to pinch myself. I get paid to build model aircraft before anyone else gets to build them. So always a very exciting day when the big DHL box turns up and we get to see what goodies we've got. So these test shots will be laid out on the table at the back there later on, so you can get some good pictures of them. Just a few pictures of when I was sat at home building test shots, because all this was done over lockdown. Obviously, leading on from here, we've got the decal design. So we were able to give the decal designer our CAD drawings so that all of the decal artwork fits properly, which leads on to our choice of schemes for this kit. So obviously A scheme, we've got the 500 Squadron, the local link here, so flew from RAF Detling, which is just up the motorway near Maidstone, not far from where I live. The 500 Squadron actually did like a field mod, and they put some extra machine guns in the cabins, and we've included those in the kit. B scheme is an Australian aircraft, so this was done as a bit of a thank you for the guys in Australia that sent all the drawings over. And then the C scheme is so we could use the different type of windscreen. This is a training aircraft, which gives us a nice contrast to the yellow undersides on the scheme. So I've got three what should be lovely schemes included in the kit.
There we go then, the long and complex journey from this is what we're going to make to this is it on the shelf. I think it makes it easier to understand why the process takes so long, because there really are an astonishing number of steps involved. And of course, if you add to that shipping delays from India, COVID and all the rest of it, then you can see why some product releases are being pushed back all the time. But I really don't think Airfix are any more happy than you or I that the KT ambulance still isn't quite available. Almost, but not quite. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed today's show. I know it's been lengthy, but I think it's been worth it. There will be more videos coming out about our day as well. They'll all be shorter than this one. But if you have liked it, remember, please give it a thumbs up single below to say you've liked it. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.